Hi, good day, and welcome to another edition of Vantage Point. I'm your host, Svetlana Marshall. Today we'll be talking about foreign affairs, and in studio we have Foreign Secretary and former Minister of Foreign Affairs, Mr. Carl Greenidge. Mr. Greenidge, thank you so much for coming today.
Hello, Svetlana. Thank you very much for the invitation.
How have you been?
I've been reasonably well, thanks. Busy in Region 6 for most of the last 3 months.
I know also that you've been treating with the court matter, the border controversy between Guyana and Venezuela. And in fact, that matter will come up in the ICJ next month, the 23rd to the 27th. You'll have oral arguments being put. What you could tell us about Guyana's preparedness for that case, determining whether the court has jurisdiction to hear, to treat with the validity of the 1899 arbitral award?
Well, thanks very much once more, and to your viewers. Good afternoon. The team on Guyana's side, of course, consists of a local team, our ambassador, diplomats, and legal officers here, as well as an external legal team. The external legal team is led by Sir Sridhar Ramphal. And they have been preparing for this case for some time. Contrary to an observation I saw in the newspaper by one of our lawyers, it is not the case that all the information and all the arguments for handling the case can have been found from 1897. In fact, the court has a number, if you like, a complaint put to it by Guyana. The exercise came out of a decision by 2 Secretaries General of the United Nations. And those 2 Secretaries General based their decision to advise that the matter be dealt with by the court, and specifically by the ICJ, on the fact that Venezuela, as party to the Geneva Agreement, had agreed to that method of resolution if all others failed. Yeah. That is the heart of the matter. And the SG Ban Ki-moon in 2016 had decided, 2015, decided that notwithstanding 50-odd years of work on this, 50-odd years of attempting a diplomatic solution or resolution, a last attempt should be made at the diplomatic level, and that last attempt failed. He brought in a very experienced personal representative by the name of Doug Newlander, who has had success in the region with Venezuela and others. And the efforts did not yield any fruit. I don't want to get into the details of that, but that meant that the court had now received from Guyana, consistent with the decision of the 2 Secretaries General, they received Guyana's case. Guyana has submitted its complaint, and the court and its rules will have to be, if you like, explained in order to justify, pardon me, why we are there. Meaning that, unlike 1966 or 1897, you are now in a situation where the reference is based upon, if you like, a new context or a new situation, and therefore that has to be prepared, and the argumentation about the powers of the SG in the context of the Geneva Agreement, the fact that this is a situation in which there is no resolution on the horizon, no peaceful resolution, have to be made. And the government of Guyana is working on that. We have to look at what is taking place in the rest of the world, the responsibilities of the court, the challenges facing Guyana, the deliberations. We won't go into any details, but the deliberations, the attempt made by the SG to resolve the matter in a diplomatic context. Okay. Abject failure in that regard. And so here we are. And the teams are doing final preparations. In fact, Venezuela, as you know, did not respond to the deadline submitted or established by the court, but instead, on the last day,
the 29th of November,
submitted a memorandum. And that memorandum does not, in our view, conform to the requirements of the court. It goes all over the place, reinterpreting the history of the region and of Guyana in particular. And therefore, our job, in a sense, is made easier because they have not addressed the issue of jurisdiction. The court will be hearing our oral presentations on jurisdiction. Venezuela will not, therefore, be addressing the meeting.
But I noticed,
and so we will have to persuade the court, and the queries that the court itself may have, the questions it needs to be answered. Sometimes that is more difficult than if you have the two sides arguing.
Okay. I noticed the court in setting the schedule for the hearings would have made provisions for Venezuela. Is Venezuela going to be there or not? Is there any clear indication? Because I saw that there were slots or days allocated to Venezuela.
As I understand the situation now, Venezuela will not be attending, and certainly if it is somewhere around, it will not be addressing the court. Okay?
All right. And what has been the effects or the impact of this controversy on Guyana, Venezuela's aggression towards Guyana, how it would have affected us as a developing nation?
Well, as you know, again, contrary to what you may read in Guyana's press, which itself can often be dysfunctional, the impact of Venezuela's claims are not cerebral. It's not something that just exists in people's minds or on the part of some wicked political party. We have a situation since 1962 in which Venezuela has tried to prevent Guyana from utilizing the resources that have constituted its boundaries since, if you like, 1648, which is when the Dutch territories, the so-called United Provinces, were separated from Spain, and when the Netherlands or the United Province was given formal dominance over this area. So we were a colony of three, and eventually under the British we became one. But what has happened has been the inability of the country to persuade the world at various points that this is a place in which investment could be undertaken without any risk or without any danger of a strategic kind, not whether there is a problem with the type of gold that there is, or whether there is a problem with the type of diamonds that you may find, or the geology, but whether there is the danger of a neighbor intervening. Venezuela claims that it has never entered in a war with another country. Well, we know that you can have military action without a war, and we know that on a number of occasions since 1962, Venezuela, if we start at the military end, has used its military muscle to exclude Guyana, for example, from Ankoko Island, our half of Ankoko Island, lying both sides of the boundary set in 1899 and agreed by them in 1905. We have seen people killed in the Cuyuni River by Venezuelan aircraft firing at them. We have seen also in 2013 the seizure of a vessel belonging to Anadarko by Venezuelan Navy, and that vessel being towed off outside of Guyana's waters. And an international outcry arose. Eventually the ship was restored. But because of the damage to the investor, because these things cost more than $1 million a day to have vessels operating in this context, they have never returned. Okay? we had a similar attempt in on December 22nd of 2017, when Venezuelan Navy, together with a helicopter, sought to board the seismic vessel working within our EEZ. And Venezuela has had the effect, therefore, of restricting the exploration work being done on our shelf. And since that time, the Exxon and the other operators and Anadarko have not ventured beyond the line that where their vessels were intercepted by the Venezuelans. It means that a resource belonging to us, recognized as ours by the world, could not be exploited by Guyana. But on the other side, apart from the military, that is, you've had Venezuela writing to businesses who were thinking of investing in Guyana or in the process of investing in Guyana, threatening them with military action, with civil action, with whatever action is open to Venezuela to prevent them from working within Guyana's boundaries. It means that what we've been able to discover on the shelf today in the petroleum sector could have been discovered in the 1960s if companies were not afraid of working in Guyana's waters. And that means that is income deferred. There's been an income loss due to us, experienced by us, over these 4 or 5 decades. And that is significant because Guyana and its population lie within the zone of income of the world in which we were regarded and have been regarded at various points as either a least developed country or a country in which a significant proportion of our populace has incomes or have incomes below the $100 per day, $1 per day UN benchmark. So it is a loss of income and well-being that we've suffered for the last 50 odd years at the hands of Venezuela. And
so do you think the aggression shown by Venezuela and the claims made by that country would have maybe caused the 2016 agreement between Guyana and Exxon to be, well, you know, there have been criticisms that we should have gotten more than 2% royalty in addition to the 50% profit. Do you think it was as a result, or that would have been a factor that was considered by Exxon that resulted in such an agreement?
Well, I don't know about the factors considered by Exxon. What I can answer for is what Guyana was doing. And I'm responsible for foreign policy, and what I have done, just to give you, well, what I have done is to try to explain where Guyana stands. I see people imputing, including even people on our side, imputing reasons on the Guyana side, which reasons I myself have not articulated, and some of which reasons no self-respecting foreign minister would articulate. So the situation was this: when we are dealing with these companies, you have to understand the background. The idea of some people that, look, everything out there is hunky-dory. You can go like Trinidad and Tobago or United Arab Emirates, and you say to an investor, just come and invest, and they will give you terms like anyone else. 50 odd years we've been trying to get an investor on that shelf. In 1980, Home Oil, a Canadian company, explored the Takatu Basin, and the first well they drilled in Takatu Basin yielded some oil. They sank a second well, but before they could even explore, what Exxon has done is to drill. They got some success, and they continued exploration work. That work was stopped because The company, Home Oil, was taken over by Hiram Walker, a business with interests in a variety of places, including in Venezuela. And for reasons that I have yet to understand, other than political reasons, the well activity was completely closed. We've not been able to go back there. Okay? Altogether, about 40 wells have been sunk by companies in Guyana's area, within Guyana's borders, and they have yielded nothing prior to 2015. So you're not dealing with a situation that is typical, and you're not dealing with a situation, therefore, in that sense, that is without risk. When, in fact, one company was doing work on the eastern side, a Surinamese vessel seized the rig. So it is foolish, and I would use a stronger term as that, undiplomatic, to be saying to the public, look, Guyana was okay, and therefore whatever was decided in 1999 when Exxon was granted a license by the PPP administration, that was wrong. The circumstances were peculiar, okay? And whilst the PPP gave, in the eyes of many, an excessive concession to Exxon, I have no difficulty with it. And I have no difficulty not because Exxon pays me or I'm looking after Exxon's interest, but because that has turned out to be in Guyana's interest. The company has continued to explore all of that shelf, save where they have been restrained by action. We also, of course, had, as I said, the situation in which you've had a company drill offshore, the very CGX, and the pressure in relation to the well they were drilling was so great that they now had to go and get a bigger company, bigger equipment to deal with that particular well. And what happened? The company, CGX, was eventually acquired by Repsol, and nothing has happened since then, as far as my seat is concerned. They may have been doing things, but no additional drilling has taken place. Do you understand what I'm saying? The assumption that any oil company has Exxon's capacity, technically, or Exxon's resolve to continue when they are pressured, as they have been by neighbors, is foolish. Okay? It is an opinion, however, to which people are entitled. But I do resent the situation in which, in Guyana, exceptionally, dialogue, public debate is very often constrained, sensible public debate, by abuse of individuals who have different views from those who are speaking, facilitation by elements of the press, where people will come and make comments defamatory without any basis whatsoever. So that is a difficulty that we face in trying to pursue the job that we have. As regards the elements of the agreement, I don't want to speak to those. I would simply say to you, a minister had responsibility for negotiations, just as the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has a minister and a team which do their work. I, as minister, consult and work with that team, and I have to take responsibility for what we come up with. I'm prepared to do that as regards my own work. I know nothing except what I've told you. I don't know anything more than I've told you as regards petroleum. If you ask me something else about the color of the of the soil or the geomorphology, I don't know anymore. And I'm not retained to use my, if I had them, technical skills there. They are technicians. Yeah. My technicians advise me. I work with them. We have lawyers that advise us. We work with them. As regards the debate on royalties, I think that's a silly debate. Okay? You can't look at the royalty alone and be carrying on an argument about the royalty. You have to look at the total package. What I have been paid to do in the recent, or perhaps not so recent past, as an economist, I've worked on fiscal policy. I've published on fiscal policy. I've been retained World Bank, universities to deal with fiscal policy, including debt. And I've seen a lot of nonsense written in our press about these things. You cannot carry on an intelligent conversation about the adequacy of a fiscal framework by just looking at royalty and saying, well, the royalty here is lower than elsewhere. What is the total package? What are the circumstances? What are the issues? And whether, if circumstances were to change from now, does that package or the size of the royalty or whatever allow you the best possible returns in circumstances that are likely to occur? So you're not fashioning a package for today. You fashion a package bearing in mind that prices may fluctuate, volume may change, and all of that. So you have to have something like the royalty, in which you receive money whatever happens to production. In other words, if production or prices in the market fall, you still have to receive that royalty once fuel is pumped. Okay? But other things can happen in the market. And therefore, the other elements of the fiscal package, whether it's the withholding tax or any other tax, will be fashioned with that in mind. This is the responsibility of Ministry of Finance and a combination of Ministry and Ministry of Natural Resources at that time. So I'm not in a position to pronounce on that. What I will tell you is that as far as the signing bonus is concerned, even the use of the term, this is an issue you have to see in total. The Ministry of Finance has said, and it will continue to say, that bear in mind that you are in a situation where you are trying to deal with a controversy, which is now a dispute over land territory, in which Venezuela is claiming to the world, falsely, but claiming nonetheless, that Guyanese and Venezuelans don't have a problem over the space that is Guyana. It is the Americans and Exxon which are in the business of trying to steal Venezuela's territory. And if you look at all the literature, you will see the government of Venezuela telling the world that this is the greatest theft that has ever taken place in the 20th or 21st century. That's the context in which you're operating. Now, in those circumstances, we are trying to persuade the UNSG to utilize the options offered by the court to ensure that we can resolve this problem, which we've been unable to resolve. Arbitration, I see some comedian, I have to use these terms, suggesting this is a solution. We are here because of an arbitration which has been accepted by the Venezuelans and then rejected. So our options are not to go back to an arbitration. And let me say this, we are not going back to arbitration because it has not proven to be something that our neighbor has shown themselves to be faithful to. So the issue here is not a simple one. That's what I'm saying to you. And we, in the circumstances, in the Ministry of Foreign Affairs, did not see the virtue of telling the world that we have received $15 million US from a company, Exxon, and we are going to use it to pay our legal fees. Now, I don't believe any sensible country would have done that. I don't believe so. And as a matter of fact, if you ask me now how one of the other countries involved in a dispute of this type have funded, or what sort of difficulties they've had getting from their treasury money to fund their court case, I'm unable to tell you because nobody makes that an issue of public debate. But Guyana, as I say, is a peculiar place, and people think that you have, it is in your interest to say anything about everything, even when you are in these tight circumstances as we are. So the 15 million was intended to fund the legal fees. We don't know how much that will be in the end, but the fees associated with the case against Suriname amounted to something in excess of 10 million. And the Ministry of Natural Resources also was able, as part of that package that was discussed, to get an additional 3 million for the training of technicians, my understanding, who would enable them to enhance their capacity to deal with Exxon and to understand what it is we have by way of resources.
Okay, before we take a short commercial break, Minister and Mr. Greenidge, I'm so accustomed to calling you Minister, but Global Witness Report, you were among the first set of Guyanese or officials to renounce or to reject that report. You would have just offered your position on the contract, the agreement between Exxon and Guyana. Do you think that the report was politically motivated?
Well, let me say, strictly speaking, the first person to mention the report and even its contents made an announcement, it seems to me, well before the report should have been finished. I saw in, I believe it might have been Kaichua News, in May, I wouldn't swear to the month, but it was a long time ago, in the newspaper, Dr. Jan Mangold saying that Global Witness, an international NGO, is to undertake a report on Guyana, and the report will be looking at corruption and all of this corruption that was going on. That is where I learned it, and long before Global Witness announced any such report. And what I was aware of, and I'll tell you this is the first time I'm going to mention it, Global Witness wrote me. Global Witness wrote me in a very, very rude letter. And I responded to them saying that they would not have written to a British minister in this manner, okay? And making accusations, calling upon me to answer accusations based upon what they'd heard. Not based upon any contract, not based upon the interview of any technicians, based upon what they've heard, and saying to me, you answer, account for what you were involved in, and blah, 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 blah. So I wrote them accordingly. I wasn't rude to them as they were rude to me. And I told them when they were in a position to speak to me about issues pertaining to risk, and what they regard as a reasonable return, how they arrived at it, bearing in mind the risks that faced the government of Guyana, and therefore a premium associated with risk, we could speak. That was my response to them. I also said to them that the contracts and the team they argued or they believed or they contended I was a part of, they were mistaken about this. Anything I said to Global Witness was contained in one single letter, apart from something saying to them, that team you're talking about, I'm not part of the team. Global Witness, nonetheless, carries a comment attributable to me that I never made. Okay, so that is the first part. There were issues of accuracy. But if Global Witness has been working on this exercise since May, why is it that only certain people, and those people who are critics and who themselves are purveyors of misinformation, why were those people only the ones knowledgeable about what Global Witness was doing? As we came close to the election, I recognized that this was the intention, to release the information just prior to the election so as to influence it. So you ask, is Global Witness politically motivated? I will put the question to you. If I am undertaking, or I have undertaken, a study of corruption, why would I be seeking to release it just prior to the holding of a general election? Why would I, if I were not politically motivated? And having embarked on the exercise as a result of having a background exercise as a result of being alerted to corruption. I don't know that anything they have done there, at least they, in their own words, say they found no corruption. No. I don't have any difficulty with them undertaking the report. I have a difficulty with the manner of the release of the findings. And I would like them to say who it is that prompted them, because one would get a feel for the motivation. You ask the question, politically motivated, let us see who prompted them. And then we will have an idea as to motivation as well. There are going to be studies done now. There are going to be studies done in the future. All types of studies. And one cannot attack or criticize people for carrying out the studies. The motives are another matter. One can speculate about. But you can make a clear conclusion based upon the timing and the release of premature information to certain people. And that is really the issue with Global Witness. I didn't disparage them in any way. I have said that, in my view, this is a controversial NGO. Let me say to you that there have been criticisms of this NGO. There have been criticisms. I've seen a president make disparaging remarks about where they place themselves and who and why they seek to judge her country. Let me not put it at more than that. So my comments on Global Witness dealt with a specific instance in which Global Witness targeted me as a result of malicious and what seemed to be attempts to defame myself and others. That was why I was entitled to respond. I don't have to sit and allow persons to defame me or to misrepresent what happened because they are wanting to enter a political arena or to get credit for something which they claim to have done. I don't have to sit and accept that. It is my individual right, and even so, as a minister, if I carried out the cabinet's wishes, I'm prepared to defend these, and that is what I've done. And I'm not going to allow people to attribute to me things that I didn't do, or to suggest improprieties where they didn't exist. And notwithstanding the fact that nowhere in that report does it seek to attribute decisions that are problematic to myself, you still find our press carrying comments by persons who clearly are maliciously intended. So,
okay. Mr. Greenidge, we'll take a short commercial break. Stay tuned, we'll be right back.
The voting process. Once you have been identified as the elector you claim to be, you would be given a ballot paper that is stamped at the back, top and bottom halves in your presence. On the ballot paper, provision is made for you to vote twice. Once at the top section where you vote for the party of your choice in the general election, and once at the bottom section where you vote for the party of your choice in the regional election. Make your mark in the box provided on the right of your choice. After you have voted, fold the ballot paper as shown by the election official. Dip the first joint of your right index finger in the ink provided and place the ballot paper in the ballot box that is there for this purpose. You would then have to peacefully depart the polling station. For more information, contact GCOM on 225-027729, 223-9653, email pro@gcom.org.gy, or visit GCOM's website at www.gcom.org.gy.
Fuel it up and drive, Super 95, tune up. Fuel it up and drive, Super 95, tune up. Protect your fuel system, boy. High mileage and performance, boy.
Guy Oil Super 95 gasoline gives you more reasons to drive and is available at 56 service stations nationwide. For affordable price, high performance, and high mileage, choose Guy Oil's Super 95 gasoline.
Fuel it up and drive!
Are you planning a trip for business or leisure and looking for the most direct and economic offers, but you're confused? And instead of heading to the internet and searching websites for best deals, you simply need to contact the travel professionals at Munishwar Travel Service, 45 Water Street, Georgetown. Their well-trained travel advisors with years of experience will assist you in booking your flights, accessing all airlines, hotels, car rentals at the most competitive prices to match your budget. Their customer service is second to none. Their qualified travel consultants will make you dream of seeing the world and ensuring your trip be the perfect one. A travel experience beyond your expectations. They'll give you the best value to save time and money. Provide 24-hour service to fix problems if things go wrong during your trip. Giving you options you haven't considered if you haven't decided where you want to go. Arrange group travel. Accepting all major credit cards, both local and overseas. Daily deals available, which are also available online. So call, visit, or email them to have the experience of their immaculate service. Munishwar Travel Service, 45 Water Street, Georgetown. 592-227-6992 or 225-2947 or drop us an email, munishwartravel@yahoo.com.
Welcome back. If you've just joined us, you're watching The Vantage Point, and today we're talking about foreign affairs. As our guest, we have Mr. Greenidge. Mr. Greenidge, now we'll talk about economic diplomacy. When President Greenidge took office in May 2015, this is something he spoke a lot about, pushing economic diplomacy. What has been the progress in this area?
Thank you, Svetlana. The work on economic diplomacy has been, I would say, pretty successful. Let me just, by way of definition, say something about the economic diplomacy. Economic diplomacy, I think, has sometimes been seen by those in Guyana who are interested or would like to be interested in this area as almost using your ambassadors to sell your product abroad. It is not anything as narrow as that. It has to do with utilizing the relationship between yourself and the rest of the world and selected elements in it to enhance the institutional as well as marketing arrangements between your countries. So in the first instance, you wouldn't expect the ambassador in the United States, Guyana's ambassador there, to be an expert in selling rice to the United States. What you do is you utilize the trade centers, the places that fashion the rules as regards international trade. The WTO, Geneva is critical in that sense. The European Union, our main market outside of that. Brussels is important in that sense. And to a lesser extent, the London and the within this region, let us say Trinidad and Tobago, Brazil, CARICOM, to ensure that the framework, the rules of trade do not disadvantage us, or we work together with countries of a similar disposition to enhance the position of small countries, low-lying states, vulnerable states, to feature in the trading arena. So there are lots of things involved here. Specific instances, yes, they include our working with the Dominican Republic to sell rice to the Dominican Republic, to enhance the position of businesses operating between the two countries, to export coconuts, for example, coconut water into the DR and elsewhere. We have worked with buyers in Cuba and Nanpasod, for example, just to name one company, a major recent exporter, out of the quarantine to sell rice and paddy to Cuba and elsewhere. So where there are problems, for example, we've had some in recent times getting our agricultural products into Trinidad and Tobago. A team was sent to Trinidad and Tobago to try and resolve the difficulties where very, very strange things happened, and that's an ongoing problem of fighting for access within a framework that's already agreed by CARIFORUM territories. It's not finished. The team went last year, and the matter is not resolved, perhaps only in relation to 2 products where some strange requirements were imposed and had the effect of closing us out to the market. More recently, we have been talking in relation to pharmaceuticals and the difficulty of getting pharmaceuticals into Trinidad and Tobago, notwithstanding CARICOM rules. The minister and I have had, or 2 ministers on the Trinidad side and I have had discussions on the agricultural side, and more recently my colleague and friend, Minister of Trade, have worked on the pharmaceutical side, and I hope in time that would be resolved. You've had also work on trying to open markets elsewhere, whether it is in the Middle East or in relation to Canada. The usual types of products. We've had discussions with Brazil, which is also a market that is very much underexploited, where we face challenges in relation to the phytosanitary rules and regulations, and also the narrowness of the products that we are in a position to produce in quantity for export. Some of that Ministry of Foreign Affairs can't help you with. You know, if you're not producing the products, that has to be fixed at the production end, this end within Guyana, by the relevant sectoral ministries. So we have really not gone very far in that particular arena. In the area of services, we've tried to encourage and work within the framework of the Economic Partnership Agreement that we have with the European Community, and a big challenge is for the region as a whole to get together to establish standards or a framework within which you can be sure that if this man says he's an actor, or she says that she's an actor, that they are actors, that they are accepted within the entire region, and the region can speak as one to the European Union saying, this is a certified Caribbean actor or dancer or organizer of events in relation to culture and media services. This is part, again, of our internal problem. We've tried to stimulate that process, but it goes beyond foreign affairs mandate or its capacity. So that is another area. We've done quite a bit in relation to Switzerland with the help of the Swiss themselves. You know, we would have opened an embassy there, at which Dr. Deep Ford was their ambassador. And in pursuit of opportunities to collaborate with the Swiss in services and so forth, we've had talks, similar work in relation to Germany. A team came here, spoke to the Ministry of Health in relation to establishing what I would call a sort of an emergency hospital or segment of the services of the hospital dealing with emergency cases and so forth. There is also petrodiplomacy. In recent times, of course, with the discovery of petroleum, we would be pursuing with collaborators in the Middle East. For example, we've spoken to the United Arab Emirates, Kuwait, about how we could collaborate to pursue common interests as petroleum producers. That is part of the work in relation to this economic diplomacy. And you will have seen, for example, that some of the commentators in relation to petroleum, again, our people, I think, see things going on elsewhere and take them often to an extreme, arguing that somehow the agreement with the petroleum companies such as Exxon will leave us as a country having to bear the burden of accidents and oil spills. In reality, the likelihood of oil spills, even with the big ones that have taken place, is tiny and probably lower than the likelihood of you being engaged in a major accident on the road in Guyana. So, but that notwithstanding, what the Ministry of Foreign Affairs has sought to do is to try to ensure that there are arrangements in place for additional compensation beyond the normal commercial limits. And so we have sought to ensure that we could get access to the International Oil Pollution Compensation Funds, for example, and the getting access ourselves into some of the international agencies dealing with bunker oil spills, and there are a whole set of these. There is risk associated with the transportation of the oil themselves, apart from what may take place at the wellhead. We have been trying to ensure that we are parties to the various agreements that cover such eventualities.
Mr. Greenidge, I know in 2018 Guyana and China signed the Belt and Road Initiative.
Yes.
Since then, what has been happening? What progress has been taking place since that agreement has been signed, and what Guyanese could expect?
Well, the Belt and Road Initiative is part of the very process of economic diplomacy, and I would say to you that the agreement provides a flexible and wide framework within which cooperation between Guyana and the Chinese government can take place. And it was at that time envisaged that many of the major infrastructure projects for which Guyana needs funding, I'd like to emphasize that. It is not that we wake up a morning and decide, oh, the Chinese are very nice people, we are partners, we are bilateral partners, we are partners in international institutions, as is the case with Germany, as is the case with Guyana and Brazil, for example. And I would like to emphasize for you that in this region, most of the countries in this region, in the absence of sufficient funds with which to finance infrastructure, the absence of sufficient funds with which to finance critically needed infrastructure, have turned to China, which has more resources than most others, is willing to make available a significant proportion of those resources for such projects. The United States used to do this in the past. It is not a major actor here. And under the current arrangements, we've seen no major initiatives in this regard. I want that to be understood. So you are not in a situation where if you just sit on your hands, somebody's going to come and fund the infrastructure. Without infrastructure funding, Guyana cannot develop. The infrastructure funding is needed even for the development of the petroleum sector. It is needed in relation to tourism. It is needed if you are to do something for many of our indigenous communities, people that live on the Berbice River and in the upper reaches of the Kanji. Without proper infrastructure, they will die unnecessarily. They will suffer from illnesses that are debilitating when they ought to be able to find infrastructure to take them to New Amsterdam, to Georgetown and elsewhere, whether it is on the river or roads or aircraft, and also to take into them equipment, supplies, and medical skills and other skills. That is missing. It is chronically missing in Guyana. Those who don't live on the coast have lots of difficulty. Infrastructure is critical to us, including energy infrastructure. So that is the area or the arena in which we are working with the Chinese. I think with all the criticisms, much of which is completely uninformed and some of which is just politically biased, if not ignorant. Much of that discussion, I think, has slowed the progress. And now, of course, with the advent of the coronavirus and the SARS type pandemic, China itself is going to be challenged to find resources in the sort of quantity and speed that it has done in the past. But the need still remains. And the specific response to the point here is that much of the agreement between us remains as simply an agreement. The construction of the airport, the work that's done on the roads were concluded before the agreement was signed, and therefore in relation to that specific agreement, very little has occurred except, if you like, an attempt to move forward with the planning. But no new project has come in as a result of that.
Okay, and this is likely to happen maybe after elections, could you say?
Well, of course, the discussions will go on after elections. I am not able to say how the Chinese will revisit their investable funds and their bilateral cooperation. But what I'm saying is it is the events that have taken place before in China are likely to slow down that arrangement and perhaps to limit the amount of resources that they can make available to countries such as Guyana and the rest of Latin America. But that having been said, billions have been spent by the Chinese in this region on the development of infrastructure, and that has also contributed to some of the increased levels of employment that you've seen in Latin America in particular. So what I think all countries in the region would have liked to see is the investment in infrastructure, enhancing employment levels, contributing to greater economic growth, and ensuring that the infrastructure needs are met.
Okay, I want to shift the topic away from foreign affairs to a bit of politics. Today marks 5 years since the Commonsburg Accord was signed, February 14, 2015, and that occurred as the whirlwind who brought the APNU and AFC together as a coalition to contest the election that year. How fruitful has that been? Besides the coalition winning the election, what kind of progress was made with respect to shared governance, with respect to the management of the country? What were some of the successes? And also importantly, while it's important for us to talk about the successes, it's also important for us to talk about challenges faced, and how do you see the coalition overcoming those challenges in years to come?
Well, thank you for raising this particular matter, and let me just take the opportunity to remind you that the meetings that led to the accord were meetings following a declaration by the AFC in particular that they wouldn't want to be associated with the APNU, and I myself had responded in public comments saying that if that was the case, then we had no place to go. I was identified to coordinate the APNU part of the negotiations, and in the end, on the other side sat an advisor, Mr. Alston Stewart, along with Mr. David Patterson, and that is how the accord came about. And in looking at the reason for the success and the nature of success of the accord, let me say first of all, we did set out from the beginning to agree in broad terms on what it is we were going to do. There has to be a common goal. Now, in the public debate, the argument was more over who would have what posts. In my own view and my own approach to the negotiations, born of the little experience I've had, is that the two parties involved in such an exercise need to recognize common goals, rather than starting off and saying, well, we want the presidency, yeah, we want the presidency, no, but we must get the presidency, which is, in a sense, where it started, and it can't go anywhere on that basis. I sought to do two things in the meetings. One, to persuade the two parties to embrace a set of common goals. If you look at Belgium, for example, where I spent a long time, and where coalitions are the norm, you, prior to even announcing that you agree to any coalition, you fashion a package. So they spend a long time hammering out a package. The package is hammered out in terms of priorities, economic and political priorities, things that they will not do together, okay? Things they will do jointly. Once you can get an agreement on that, you have the first step going forward. And that is what happened in those negotiations. There was such an agreement, and that was relatively easy to conclude. I say relatively, because in politics of Guyana, nothing is easy. And the other dimension was to then address the package. And what I did, what I offered the APNU side and the two sides, were proposals that said, look, you are the parties to this negotiation, and I have put together an arrangement that has two options. You can choose one of those two options. Your choice is the presidency and a couple of other positions, okay, and prime minister and vice president and a couple of other positions. And the trick was to make the two packages relatively similar in terms of attractiveness. That was the logic. And when this was put to the parties, they hem and hawed. Eventually they modified them to add vice presidents, as you would have noticed or realized, and eventually to add to the package some ministries, and then in the end, in the final, between the heads of the two groupings, they agreed on the allocation of ministries. So the point I would make is that as with the formation of the coalition, so with implementation, what matters is the goals. If they don't agree goals, if they have not agreed on what they're going to be doing in the coming period, then you can expect a lot of trouble. And if you don't nail down the apportionment of responsibilities, then there are going to be two sets of trouble. One is over the infighting, okay, continued infighting, and the other is over when things fail, whose fault that was. So, one, we were able to put together a package that enabled us to do some of the things that you saw in terms of the priorities. Those priorities, whether they be in relation to infrastructure, and probably more important for me, where I sit, or in my personal capacity, the institutional arrangements, whether they had to do with ensuring that the procurement arrangements were in place, governance arrangements, as well as priorities treating with infrastructure, trying to ensure that discrimination, which we perceive to be widespread in relation to the allocation of public resources, where the previous government would build a road through a community, and the community has one ethnicity this side or perceived supporters up to point A, and the road would end there in terms of its rehabilitation, where major infrastructures to be put in place seem to be more influenced by whether this is a community that supports us or not. That was something, since the two sides had agreed on before, their approach to treating such investment or infrastructure was reasonably unified. We'd agreed certain things wouldn't be done. We agreed this is what has to be done. Whatever's done, not perfect, but bear in mind, this is a consensus between the two sides. Supporters of the APNU would like to see a lot more things done in one domain or in another arena. The APNU supporter, the FC supporters would not. So certain things had to be left, however desirable they may be for your supporters. This is one of the problems of a coalition. The coalition has to pursue those things on which there's a consensus. Some things may be eminently desirable, okay, but you can't get a consensus. You can't get the two sides to agree, and if they go into the parliament without agreement, you're going to get an alliance, or the opposition will seek to have an alliance between themselves and maybe even a minority on the APNU side. So that would have defeated the whole object of, if you like, of democracy. So the success, I think, of the APNU AFC coalition has to be looked at in that regard, and the way they've been able to bring in skills and even political positions that many people would have thought one party would not have been able to implement. That is the general nature of the success that we've achieved. I don't know that one has to identify a specific project. What I'm saying to you is that they agreed on the broader categories of priorities beforehand. Those have been by and large pursued. There were, of course, commitments made in respect of energy which have not been achieved in terms of meeting the bulk of our energy needs. Nobody can tell you that that has happened. You've had work in relation to renewable energy and so forth. Quantum, still far behind what we would have anticipated in 2015. And so there remains a considerable amount to be done. You've had a great deal of attention paid to hinterland communities, rehabilitating of infrastructure, establishment of roads and infrastructure where there were none, in areas ranging from, let us say, the south of Lethem and Nanai, and in the northwest. These things are there. The work in relation to bringing industry elsewhere, such as in relation to manganese in the northwest, where there's a Chinese project which had taken over from Réunion, which was going to mine manganese there, has been, in a sense, slowed by the sudden discovery or unearthing of an illness which appeared to be a mystery illness to begin with. But so you've had mishaps along the way. I think the major challenge that the coalition has faced, and which it continues to face, is to ensure that in the implementation of the projects on which there is agreement, you do it in such a way as to have total ownership, not only of the coalition, but of the country. Because sometimes we have done things and you've ended up with a situation in which the public perceives it, and partly perhaps because of the way that we have done it, as an APNU or an AFC project. And you have to get away from that. That defeats the purpose of the exercise. We have also not been able to merge our capacities on the PR side. The PR on the government side has been very poor. Certainly at the political level, because you have the government and its agencies, but at the political level between the parties. So you have, I think, I hope I'm not going to be hung for this, the AFC has maintained a capacity to sell itself and its projects, whereas certainly the PNC seems to have disappeared off the map. APNU has itself not done as well as it ought to have done, given its weight in the coalition and given its own interest in the projects that have been carried out. So it has found itself often under attack, perhaps unreasonably so, quite often. And that has been a problem. Of course, the no confidence vote has done tremendous damage to this country. I would say that the no confidence vote shook the foundations of the coalition, because there were many who felt that, look, you take on a small partner like this, the small partner has not been able to guarantee the reliability of its members, and therefore in the future we should not enter into an arrangement like this. This was the mood for much of 2019, and we rode that out. But I think that people are believing that that matter is solved. It's not solved in any sense. You've perhaps ridden out the storm, but another storm can easily arise. But the more important damage is suspicion now on the part of the party, and the excuse given by Mr. Charandas Prasad about the unhappiness with decisions taken. Decisions were taken, I can say this, Charandas and I sat at the same table almost every meeting of the parliament. We sat opposite each other, and in all of that time, I had never heard him mention in the way that he did in the parliament, subsequently rather, that he was regarding himself as not being heard when he complained about the laying off of workers. I mean, and it would have been perhaps unreasonable for him to say that, because of course what you know is that throughout the life of this country, you've had periods of extensive laying off of workers. If you want to go to the 19th century, I can list you the examples of the laying off of workers by the sugar industry, which was the main employer, as late as the 1890s, giving rise to the recall movement and other political phenomena. You had the same problem again in the 1920s. And of course, going back to Berbice, I mentioned Berbice a little while ago, the creation of Black Bush Polder Drainage and Irrigation Scheme was as a result of the closure of the sugar estates on the Upper Quarantine. So this is part of the cycle of economic change. When, contrary to what one of my friends on the PPP side said, it is wickedness on the part of the government that workers could have been laid off. You know, in politics, sometimes people say things which, of course, on reflection, they know not to be true. We have experienced across this country all sorts of layoffs. You had layoffs in the public sector. The PPP laid off thousands of workers after they came to office in the mid-90s. In the mid-1990s, the public sector was significantly diminished. Clarence Ellis, one of our most prominent economists in this region, addressed this matter. He spoke to this. He criticized the government for doing it in a racially discriminatory manner. Not going back to that now, but I'm saying to you, we must leave behind a situation in which both the press and the commentators look at history as though it begun yesterday, and it is only about running down a government or a particular party. If you do this, then you are unable to fashion sensible economic policies, because what is a norm or a common phenomenon is suddenly regarded as an aberration by a government. The purpose of a business, private or public, is to make money. It is to export or produce for sale, and the income from those sales go towards funding labor costs, meeting other costs that are associated with production, and surpluses are used for investment so that you can have greater capacity or additional capacity to enhance production. If you don't recognize that, then suddenly the laying off of sugar workers at Wales is a reflection of some miscreant in the APNU. But how do you explain the laying off of thousands of bauxite workers, the handing over of the entire industry to foreign firms? This is what has happened in relation to bauxite. All of bauxite is now controlled by foreign firms, and the nearly 6,000 people that would have been employed in Linden, okay, Aichuni, Kokwani, in Berbice and Demerara. All of those were laid off. Today, bauxite employs less than 1,000 workers. All right? It is not the hand of God here. So I just want to say that to you. The coalition has to deal with those challenges and also to educate its own members, which is part of the failure, so that you don't have the Sharon Dash type repetition where people fabricate reasons for doing things that are clearly things in their own monetary interest. And I don't mind saying this because there was no way that, in no way has his switching sides led to the enhancement of the well-being of sugar workers. In no way whatsoever. In fact, it's made life more difficult for them in so many ways.
Okay, you talk about sugar and you talk about Charnas, and where, as we wrap up today, I just have two more questions for you. One, Region 6, that's your area. What has been the mood? We're about 18 days away from elections. What is the feeling on the ground with respect to coalition support? Do you think you'll be able to muster much more votes than you did in the 2015 elections?
Well, I expect us to muster more votes than we did in 2015. I would say to you, first of all, that I have a team in Region 6 which is a very dynamic team. It is something I can say from the very beginning, which you can judge for yourself, because the rally in New Amsterdam that was held was the largest gathering. Most people, I certainly have never seen a larger gathering in New Amsterdam as at a political gathering. You had a similar result at Rose Hall, and we expect that on the 18th, the rally in Corriverton will be of the same magnitude. In between whiles, we have had meetings elsewhere, whether it is in Angois Avenue or East Bank by Sisters, or in Kanji last week, or elsewhere in the quarantine, Manchester, Lancaster, and so forth. These have been exceptionally well attended. So I take that to be a sign of the effectiveness and efficiency of the team that has been assigned to work in Berbice. Now, whether that response by the public will be reflected in the vote depends on whether we can persuade people up to the last minute to get up early, to vote peacefully, and to vote right. Okay, vote correctly. That is the challenge that is before us. In politics, a week is a long time, and we still have a long time in that sense to finish the exercise. Our challenge is to make sure we get the voters to go and vote, and whilst you are doing that, to ensure that they understand what the election is about. For most of the people in Berbice, the challenge is whether they should vote for the PPPC, where it is clear that although the courts have said that Mr. Jagdeo is not entitled to another term, it seems to most people, from his activities, from his pronouncement, from the persistence and resoluteness of his dominance of the campaign, that the appointment of Mr. Irfan Ali as the PPP presidential candidate is really just a fig leaf to cover a government that will really be run by Mr. Jagdeo. And that, I think, is how the electorate sees it. And that is why it is likely that there will be problems for him in Berbice, where traditionally the PPP has done exceptionally well because of the large communities associated with sugar, with PPP and GAU and the like. And we have the fear by those very persons that some of the sourness of the pre-2015 era is likely to return. Even on the economic side, you know, the decline in growth. 1991, you started a rate of growth 7.2%, 6.5%. Positive growth inherited by the PPP continued through Mrs. Jagan's era, and then subsequently into 2000 into negative and zero growth territory. People are also bearing that in mind, and as well, if you like, the abuse of power that took place in that first decade of this millennium. They are worried about going back to that experience. And for that reason, I'm optimistic. You're never sure of everything in politics, but at this point in time, the mood in Berbice is pretty good, and I can say even for the other side, where I have no responsibility, where the campaign is being run in Region 5, you have the same mood, the same concerns. I was in Maracaibo the other day. I was up the Berbice River in early January. Same concerns are being raised in terms of resources being made available to communities on a discriminatory basis, the abuse of executive power, these types of things, absence of transparency in relation to procurement. That is a contentious area.
You spoke about the country's economic performance from
Yes.
1991 into 1992 and then into 2011 and so forth. What's your assessment of, as an economist, of Guyana's performance between 2015 and 2019?
I would say that the performance has been good. The economic performance of the post-2015 period has been very good. And what perhaps is most worthy of mention has been the preoccupation with ensuring, if you like, that you don't have economic imbalances. Perhaps, in my personal view, to the point of being too conservative. So that is, however, the reality, in the sense that it has ensured that the major variables have remained of the right color, they've remained of the right magnitude, and now that you have a major resource available generating income of a considerable magnitude, we are in a position to pay attention to growth issues now, substantial growth issues. And I make mention of this for this reason. We have long recognized, and if you look even at the development plan fashioned by Kenneth King with the various teams that were put together in the 1990s, they pointed to exceptional economic growth being a requirement that is beyond 7%, you're talking about 12 and beyond, in order for you to tackle meaningfully the unemployment and the low-income problem of this country. Many people are in work, they're working for incomes that are too low. Okay? Much of the employment where incomes are too low are low-income employment. You're talking, whether it is of sugar or it is in the sector, the service sector. These things need to go if the welfare of Guyana is to be raised in a sustainable fashion. So attention can now properly be paid to channeling the resources from the petroleum sector, not to subsidizing workers in a sugar industry that is unreformed and unproductive. And I, as the Acting Secretary General of the ACP Group, and then as the Director of the Technical Center for Agriculture and Rural Cooperation, did undertake studies on behalf of Guyana within the ACP Group, showing that attention needs to be paid to field productivity in the field of the sugar sector, and the efficiency of the factory operations. And in trying to fix that, the government would have had to pay attention to labor relations, indisciplined labor relations, the abuse of positions by political appointees in the field, and as regards the factories, in ensuring efficiency in the factories improved by relocating production around the more efficient factories in the sugar sector. In reality, what has happened in that time, 2005 to 2015, you reassembled production around factories that were not the most efficient, especially in Demerara. We are paying the price for that. We are paying the price for that. And that is not to ignore the consequence of the complete misinvestment in Skeldon in a factory which itself probably would have worked okay, but which you took over from the contractors without the normal protocols of ensuring that the factory had attained the standards that were the suppliers committed to in the contract. That is what normally happens. For some reason, our president at the time, in his own wisdom, gave the go-ahead for them to take over the factory without the proper protocols of commissioning. So the equipment for lifting the canes out of the pond constituted a major problem. In relation to the process of grinding and conversion, you also have problems that up to today have not been fixed. And that was at the time the largest investment ever undertaken by the government in Guyana. Major waste of resources. If you finish that project in 2005, whenever it was, up to today the factory has not contributed in any meaningful way to repaying the loan that went on its acquisition. So that type of activity have to be avoided, and we, I think, have gone some way. The attempt to sell the resources to the private sector so that the private sector can use it in a way that's meaningful. A number of the goals that the potential buyers have indicated are goals in which we're interested. Diversification even of the sugar plant. Sugarcane is a plant, a grass, from which you can get a wide variety of other products, ranging from chemicals, natural chemicals, to food for livestock. Okay, the comfort, the inside of the sugarcane can be used. It's a good source of energy for livestock. I did work on that in Kenya when I first started researching. And also in relation to the government's own factories, those that remain with the government, they can invest in enhancing productivity in that sector so that we can meet our needs, meet the needs of the Caribbean market, and take advantage of the opportunities that lie in the Caribbean and elsewhere for sugar that people are now committed to buying. Food in general, natural products. This can go and make a contribution to that market. So the government sector can do its own story, and the others in terms of the development of confectionery, soft drink sector, that many of the private buyers look to the opportunities that lie there. If that can be realized, then you will have employment at a higher average per capita income than has existed in the distant past in this sector, because sugar has been a low-income sector from the time it was established in this country. And we have to move out of that. People are not wanting to spend a lifetime in such a sector. So it has to be enhanced in terms of productivity, in terms of the skills that it uses, in terms of the digitization, the opportunity for use of technology ranging from drones, which can help to inform the crop spraying regimes, the irrigation processes, so that you don't waste so much time and energy on drainage that is inappropriate, and that type of thing.
Okay, Mr. Greenidge, I must say thank you so much for joining us here on Vantage Point. And with that, we've come to the end. I must say, do join us next Monday for another edition of Vantage Point. I've been your host. Do have a blessed rest of the day. Goodbye for now.